Hello and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and I read a ton of books, so I recommend the best to you. And am I going to be doing that today? Because it is the April wrap up and I had the best reading month of the year so far. I read 27 books. One of them was in audio, so technically I read 26, but we are counting the audio, so there are 27 books I'm going to be talking to you about on this episode. 27 is my favorite number, so we're feeling very lucky on this episode. But first, as we do on these monthly wrap-up episodes, I'm going to talk a little bit about my month. But first, how many times am I going to say first? The first thing I'm going to talk about is our May book club, because it is May, which is really so crazy. I feel like as I get older, I say this more and more every year, but this year really, really is flying by. I feel like it's because I had a lot of big life changes in the beginning of the year. January started and then February was all about interviewing for my job. And then March and April, I've been back to work and it's just been so much going on. I'm so happy it is May because we are one step closer to summer. Summer, Kayla, is starting to defrost. If you are new to Carrot What and me, summer is my favorite season. I am the best version of myself in the summer. I leave the city for most of the summer and I spend pretty much all of my time that I can out on Long Island at my mom's, and I'll just read by the pool and go to the beach every weekend. And I'm so excited because Memorial Day weekend, my mom's pool starts opening. So hopefully the weather will be warm enough and be able to read by the pool this Memorial Day weekend. Last few years, it was still pretty chilly here. So TBD on that. And then in June, it's so annoying. The pool's only open on the weekends. Then after school's closed, it's just open all through. So I guess I'm just telling you guys my summer plans now because this will impact you guys. I'm pretty much, since I work fully remotely, I'm planning on just basically moving in at my mom's for July and August. July specifically, my brother's getting married. It's my 30th birthday. There's just so much going on with my family that I would have to be home every day basically anyway. So just makes sense. And then I could work from the pool, easily go to the beach on the weekends. It's going to be so lovely. And part of why that impacts you guys is because I have heard loud and clear in person, because at the time of recording yesterday was my Barnes and Noble event, which I'm obviously going to talk about. Some listeners met my mom there and they requested she come on the podcast. So she'll definitely come on because I'm going to be recording when I'm basically living with her again this summer. But anyway, all that to say, it is finally May. We are one step closer to summer, Kayla. And our May book club pick is a really good one. It is Funny Story by Emily Henry. And funny story about this one, I typically with the book club picks will wait to read it until the end of the month because I like to record the book club episode right when it's about to air so that way I can include your guys' thoughts. But I couldn't wait with this one. I wanted to read it right away. So I actually read it in April. I'm not going to give you anything away on this episode except to say that I did give it 5 stars. I loved this book so much and I cannot wait to chat to you guys about it. This is just a logistical thing. I don't know if this is even interesting to you, but I'm most likely going to be recording the book club episode sometime this week. And then I will just kind of edit in your thoughts. So please, if you have already read it, I know most of you are probably already planning on reading it. You can submit your thoughts to me to be included in the episode. Please get them to me by May 28th, and the episode will be out on May 30th. So you can read it over Memorial Day weekend. It would be a perfect holiday weekend read. I just loved it so much. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to save it all for the special book club episode. If you are new here, we choose a book each month to just read at our own pace. And at the end of the month, I put out an episode where I give all of my thoughts. It's full of spoilers. And then the episode is just there for whenever you finish the book. And it's very exciting. So it's the April wrap up. Let's talk about April. I was thinking back before, April felt so long, even though it went by so quickly. I was kind of measuring it in what I did by weekend. So the first weekend of the month, I went and I had a lovely day in Central Park. And then I went on a shopping spree, which was just so much fun. I love to shop. I have a shopping addiction. It is my vice since I don't drink or do drugs. And I basically just got a whole new wardrobe. It was so much fun. And then the next weekend, what did I do? Oh, I think the next weekend is when my medical mystery started. So I've talked about this on enough episodes, but I basically didn't know that I have a giant ovarian cyst and it started acting up and I was not okay for a bit. So that did take up like a bit of my month and I was home for a week, which I didn't plan on that happening. Because I was home though, I got to celebrate my brother's birthday with him. We all went, there's like this local brewery that my brother and his fiance specifically love and they go all the time. So we like hung out there all day. It was so much fun. There was live music. We just got like food. Everyone else was drinking. My mom brought a cake. So it was nice that I was home and was able to do that. And then I was like really taking it easy for a while, kind of like on the mend. And I had to go home again because it was my future sister-in-law's bridal shower. It was really nice to just see so much of my family that I don't see as often. I have a big extended family that we just don't all get together that much anymore. So it was cool to see everybody and like be together for that. And then my sister and I hung out with my cousin who were very close with that night. And it was just a lot of fun. And all leading up to, I had my Barnes and Noble event, which if you follow me on Instagram, I'm sure you've seen because I posted about it so much. But it was the coolest thing of my entire life. I know some of you listening were there, which was so special. I know people watched because I went live. So that way it is just like exists now on K-Red What. So you can go and watch it. It's under the Reels tab. It was so cool and a dream I didn't even know that I had because I just never thought I would get the opportunity to do that. But once I had the mic in my hand, it just felt so right. I wasn't nervous. And going when so basically how it came to be was that the publisher reached out to me and asked if I would moderate that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I moderated a conversation with Janet Skilskin Charles, the author of the Paris Library and her latest novel, Miss Morgan's Book Brigade. And they asked me to do it and I was thrilled and honored and so excited. And I just knew I could do it. I knew I could do a good job. I just felt confident in that I do this. I can talk. That's not a problem. I love interviewing authors. When I first started doing that on my old podcast, Books in the City, I realized early on, like, oh, this is a skill set that I didn't even know that I had. And it came very easy to me very quickly. And then with talking with other people and the other girls on the show, I realized that it's not the same for everybody. And I was like, oh, maybe this is actually like a talent that I have. So I knew I could do it. And I knew I would be able to like do a good job. And I at first was like, oh, I sounded so nervous. But everyone was so impressed by how well I did it, which was very nice to hear. I'm not sure what anyone was expecting, but even my parents and my best friends were there and they were just so blown away. And it was so funny. I showed them afterwards because I had written my questions out on index cards. So I felt like Andy Cohen. And I only wrote like one sentence of what it would be about, but then when I was asking the question there was like more of a spiel to it and they were blown away that I was just like riffing and coming up with everything on the fly. So it was so cool, like such a special night. I really feel so privileged that I got to do it. I loved it. I had so much fun. And then afterwards, me, my mom, my sister, and three of my best friends went out to dinner and we were there for like 2 hours just laughing and having so much fun. It really was just like a really cool, special night. April was, aside from the health thing, I really had a good month. Like nothing crazy really to report. Last April, my life felt like that's when it felt like my life was starting to blow up when 2023 started to be a bad year for me was at the end of April. So I've really just been looking back on what my life was like a year ago right now and just realizing, that's when my last podcast ended and people exited my life and things just started changing very quickly. And I really felt like I had spent years building something and it was ripped away from me. And it's just really crazy that exactly a year later, look at what I was just asked to do. And I really feel like I was able to build it back up on my own. And it was special when it was me with friends, but it's kind of more special when it's something that I did myself. And I just really had a moment yesterday at the Barnes Noble event to be like, wow, like I did this. Like this is because of me and because of all of you guys actually for being interested in what I have to say and supporting me, and that does not go unnoticed. Like Care Bud and Professional Book Girl would not be what it is without you listening. So thank you for that. I guess we'll end on that emotional note. We should probably get into it because we have so many books to talk about. I'm just going to dive right in. If you're new to the monthly wrap up episodes, I kind of quick fire go through all of the books that I read in the month. I know that 27 is so many. And honestly, a huge part of why I got through so many books is because I did have that medical issue this month where I really couldn't do anything. I was just on the couch reading for like 2 weeks. So I was going through like a book a day during that. Oh, and then I did that readathon, which that was kind of crazy because I didn't do a good job at it, but that helped with this too. So let's get into it. The first book is Murder Road by Simone St. James. I gave this 4 stars. Simone St. James is my go-to for paranormal thrillers. All of them are just great thrillers, period. And then there's a bit of a spooky edge to it. She is the person who got me into paranormal thrillers, and she's really the only one that I read. I did read The September House last when did I read that? Last year maybe. And that was also a paranormal thriller and I really liked it, but I typically don't reach for those unless it's Simone St. James. She just has a way of telling a story. She sucks you in, and the twists are so good. The paranormal element is always so interesting. They're always so spooky, and I do like it because sometimes, I read so many thrillers and I always say like nothing is really too dark for me, which is an issue I will deal with in therapy one day. But so when I read thrillers, a lot of the times, like, it doesn't like spook me ever, but there's something about the paranormal thriller that does give it that like spookier element. Not scary, not horror, because I don't like jump scares and things like that. But I love a Simone St. James novel. So this one is her latest, and this is about a couple that are driving to their honeymoon. It's the 90s, so they're using paper maps. That's like a big part of this. And they take a wrong turn off of a highway, and they are on this kind of like deserted road through the woods in this small town somewhere in New England. And they see this woman in the road and she is not okay. So they stop and they realize like there's blood gushing from her abdomen. She is like very clearly dying. She has been attacked. They get her in the car and they bring her to the hospital. But on their way to the hospital, the husband saw this like, what are those trucks called? Those giant trucks. Is there even a real name for them? I don't know why I'm blanking on that, but he sees like one of those giant trucks on the road, like a shipping truck that like holds things. And what he sees in the front seat freaks him out, and he assumes that it's related to this woman. They get there to the hospital, and everything I'm saying like is on the back of the book, and this happens in like the first 50 pages. And it's all the setup for the book, so I'm not like giving away the whole book. But the woman dies, and all of a sudden though, the couple are suspects in the case, so they have to stay in the town because they're being investigated. And they start looking into it, and I'm not going to say anything else, but there are twists and turns. There were some really great characters in this one. It was spooky. One part I thought was a little bit scary. I really enjoyed it. I gave that 4 stars. The next book that I read is The Vatican Princess by C.W. Gortner. I also gave this 4 stars. This is really my 4-star month. I gave so many books this month 4 stars. I covered this on a full episode of the show, so if you want to hear more, go and listen to that. But this is a biographical fiction about Lucrezia Borgia, who is the daughter of a pope. I have since I posted that episode where I covered this one in full, started watching the Borgias, so I'm very slowly making my way through it. But this is really about half of her life. I learned in the author's note that even the rest of her life was insane, but her father becomes pope when she's 12 years old, and suddenly she is now a political pawn, and she enters this marriage that isn't great, obviously. And you kind of see all of the power and all the political plays between her dad and her older brothers. It was like very Game of Thrones. If you love a court drama, you will love this. I loved Lucrezia. She was so strong. Like, her life was insane. You cannot believe it is real. So good. I give that 4 stars. And this was my first book by that author, and I loved it. So I'm very excited to continue reading more from him. The next book I read, oh my God, this is so crazy. Actually, I just realized I read 3 books in a row written by men. I don't think that's ever happened in my life. I'm sorry. Anyway, I didn't do this on purpose, obviously. The next book that I read is Everyone Brave is Forgiven by Chris Cleave. This was one of my 24 and 24 books. I gave this 3 stars. I honestly just, it didn't really do it for me. And I actually kind of don't really remember what the main plot was, which I always remember the plots. I kind of like pride myself on being able to just look at a book on my shelf and know what it was about. So that tells you something about this book, but it's a World War II historical fiction. There's the main girl she's from like an affluent family and she wants to volunteer and be a part of the war effort, but when she joins, it's the beginning of the war in 1939 when nothing is really happening and everybody starts calling it the phony war. Obviously people learned very quickly that this was not a phony war. She starts teaching at a school. That's where they assign her to a school, but then the Pied Piper scheme happens, which we talked about on episode 1 of this podcast, which is when the children in London were sent to homes in the countryside because they knew that London would end up being bombed and they wanted to save them. So all of her class goes away to the countryside and she's kind of out of a job then. She falls for a guy who's kind of like the superintendent of the district, like a school administrator. And we also follow him a bit because his roommate volunteered to join the army, and we got things about the guy's army training and the stories kind of cross over. So I guess I do remember what it's about, but I don't know, like nothing really special to report. It didn't really do it for me. The next book that I read, also by a man, I'm sorry, was Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. I gave this 4 stars. This was my first by this author, and it was so funny after I posted about it and I said that I loved it. I had a bunch of DMs from UK followers who were like, oh, I love his books. There's like this series everyone recommended that I read. So it's definitely on my radar now. I can't remember. Sometimes I can't remember if I covered a book on the podcast or filmed a Kara what video for it. I don't think I covered this on the podcast, but this book is wild. So this is a thriller about a multiple women actually, but I guess I would say the main one. Her daughter was like 5 years old and she was kidnapped and murdered. And after that, something happens with her husband and now she has basically lost her family and she cannot get over it, obviously. And she knows the man who did it, but they were never able to convict him. And she is so obsessed with killing him and it's become this issue. And she basically is sent by the court to go to this like trauma therapy group. And when she's there, she meets this woman, Wendy, whose daughter was also murdered. And they have this drunken night. They become friends. They bond over their trauma. And they come up with this idea. Literally the title of the book, Kill for Me, Kill for You. They'll kill each other's guy. So that way, like, they won't be able to suspect, be able to get away with it, basically. So the main girl, I obviously forgot her name, she kills Wendy's guy. And then Wendy disappears and it all kicks off from there. And then there is this side storyline about this woman who was brutally attacked in her home by a known serial killer. For some reason, he left her alive. And you follow her as she's trying to deal with the trauma of that. And for so long, I was like, how are these storylines going to intertwine? And when they did, oh my God, like so good. I couldn't put this down. I loved it so much. I gave it 4 stars. Loved it. The next book that I read is The House on Biscan Bay by Chanel Clayton. Chanel Clayton is one of my absolute favorite historical fiction authors. She writes really great Cuban American historical fiction, I would say, because most of them are about this one family specifically that had to come over to escape like Castro and all of that in the 50s. So this one takes place in Florida in the early 1900s, and it is about basically like a haunted house, I would say. So there's 2 timelines. The earlier timeline is about this woman whose husband is building this house, and it's kind of during the time when Florida is really starting to become this like destination for the wealthy. And she is just she never really, she didn't like the house. She didn't like that her husband was like investing all of their money in it. And there's a death at the house and then she's just like completely disappeared. And then it's like 30 years in the future and the main girl there is, her parents have just died and she's 18, so she's going to live with her sister who married a guy who had bought this house on Biscan Bay. And weird things start happening, so she starts looking into the original owners and all of it comes to light. It's like historical fiction murder mystery. Like the mystery is really the biggest element. It's just that it takes place, I think it's in the 40s and the early and like the 1910s. Don't quote me on that. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. It was a really quick read. If you love Chanel Clayton's writing, you'll also like this. This is a standalone from her Perez sisters book, so you don't have to read those ones, and you can just read this one whenever. It doesn't have to be in any specific order. The next book I read was Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren. I also gave this 4 stars. So this is a really interesting take on the Hollywood romance trend. And it's really interesting because this came out, I think, in 2019. So this was out before that trend even started. And our main girl, we meet her when she is like 18 and she's on this dream trip to London with her grandma, which I could totally relate to the dream trip to London thing. I loved reading about that. And when they get to their hotel, they meet this grandfather and grandson pair, and they just become friends and end up spending a lot of their trip together. The main girl falls for the guy. Like, he's so hot. They're the same age. They start meeting up at night in the garden of the hotel, and they just get really, really close. And it's that all-encompassing teenage first love type relationship. And she feels comfortable enough to share with him a secret she has never told to anybody else, and that is who her father is, because her dad is the A-list actor. Like, George Clooney meets Brad Pitt meets like Robert Downey Jr. is how I was picturing him. Everybody knows him. He's won multiple Oscars. He's on the cover of every magazine. And she's his daughter, and nobody knows that. So she opens up, she shares the secret. She's in love with this guy. They spent multiple weeks together. And one day she walks outside her hotel and there's a million paparazzi there, and her life is exploding because he went and sold the story to the press. So then it flashed forward like 10 years, maybe more. And we meet her again, where she's now a successful actress and she's about to work on her first movie with her dad. So then we start getting like a little bit of like fill in the gaps of what happened with her and her dad in the years in between. And she's like had a lot of success she started in like a Vampire Diaries type show, which I love that. And she's been in a lot of rom-coms, but this is a bit more of a serious movie, and it's really going to be like a career maker for her. And it's also kind of, her dad is aging out a little bit. So it's a big deal that they're finally doing a movie together and whatever. So they're filming this whole movie in Northern California, and it's like, I guess it would be, I don't know, close set probably isn't the word, but they're all like staying there on this like ranch type place where the movie's being filmed. And she goes to the table read and she sees the screenwriter, and it's the guy from London who in some cases ruined her life. And she freaks out, obviously, and obviously they rekindle, and you can guess what happens. The romance, though, isn't really the main plot of this. Like, the main story really is about her and her career and her relationship with her dad, and I just found it so interesting. I thought it was such a unique premise for the Hollywood story trope, and yeah, I really loved it. And I've seen people not love it as much, and I think it's because like I love Christina Lauren books, obviously for the romance. They're romance books, but the romance does take a little bit of a backseat to all this family drama going on. So I've seen people not really liking it because of that. But if you go into it knowing that, then you'll probably have a better experience. The next book that I read was The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I did cover this on an episode recently, so I'm not going to go too much in depth, but I think that this was a return to form for Holly Jackson. I love the first 2 books in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. I don't know why that is so hard to say. The third one, hated, and I hated Five Survive. Like, I don't know why I even finished it. It made me so angry. So I was nervous to pick this one up, and I honestly probably wouldn't have, but I thought the premise was really interesting and I loved it. So I'm glad that I picked it up. So really quickly, this is about the reappearance of Rachel Price. Obviously, we open up and we meet Belle, who is the daughter of Rachel Price. And when she was like 2 years old, her mom disappeared, and it became the biggest cold case in America. And now 16 years later, a documentary is being made about it. But in the process of making the documentary, Rachel reappears, and we follow then her, like right away she moves back into the family home, and Belle doesn't know her. And we follow the aftermath of her return, but some of her story doesn't add up. And Belle does not trust her from like the second she sees her. And she starts investigating what actually happened to her mom, and it all blows up. And I just thought this was such a unique premise. I love the documentary aspect of it. I loved the missing person returns and it's your mom. Like that was such an interesting dynamic to read about. It was pretty crazy. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. If you want to hear more, go to the episode where I discussed it in full. The next book is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Septimius. This is my third from her, I think, and I've loved all of them. So she writes really great YA historical fiction. My favorite was The Fountain of Silence, but then I think my favorite one was the Romanian one that now I can't remember the name of, but I loved that book. I think it was her last book that came out. This is a Cold War, or actually, I think it's kind of like World War II, YA historical fiction. It is about a family who are taken by the Russians when the Russians invade their country and forced into a gulag because her dad was a professor. And you follow them from the day that the book opens and the Russians are knocking on their door. They are put into these trains and you follow them as they are in camps, in labor camps. And it's a really beautiful story about strength and family bonds and friendship and resilience. And I don't want to give too much away, but all of Ruta's books, the writing is so beautiful. You really just are so immersed in the story, and it's so bleak and horrifying, but really hopeful at the same time, which I think is a really special thing to be able to pull off in a book like this. So I gave that 4 stars. The next book that I read was Bye Baby by Carla Levering, which I also covered in full on an episode. So go listen to that for the full story. But this is, I would say, like an adult friendship suspense. We are following the friendship of 2 women who used to be absolute best friends, and now in their adult lives have very different lives. One of them has this really cool job at a travel agency. The other married into an old money family. She's a mom and she's an influencer. And when her daughter goes missing, it all kicks off. But we also have flashbacks to from the day they meet as teenagers. We see their whole experience together. We know that they have this big secret that they are protecting each other from, and it is so good. Just such a quick read. So good. I really love that. I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read was Inner Circle by Kate Bryan. This is part of my private reread. If you don't know, I am rereading the series Private, which was my favorite series when I was in high school. This is the 5th book. I keep now I'm like hitting things that I just completely forgot about. I feel like the first books initially I remembered a bit more. And then there is one giant thing that I remember that hasn't come out yet. So it's funny. Every book I'm like, is this the book? But I'm really enjoying this reread, and I obviously can see why I was obsessed with it as a teenager. And they're just really quick to read, even though they're like the ones I'm getting into now are like 200 pages, but it's written the level that it's written at. Like I just fly through them. It takes me like an hour or so. Really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I finally read Down the Drain by Julia Fox. This is her memoir. I knew really nothing about her, and I learned so much. This is like a true New York story. We follow her when she moves here as a child immigrant from Italy. She had such a wild New York life. I don't want to give anything away, but we see her upbringing and her wild teenage years and her work as a dominatrix. And then at the very end, she talks about the rapper she dated, which is how I came to know her. And I liked the way she didn't name him and how she wrote about him. But it was really just, I am so interested in her now. Like she has had such an amazing life and she's so cool. And I'm excited to see what she does next. I gave that 4 stars. The next book that I read was A King's Obsession by Alison Ware. This is the Anne Boleyn book in her Tudor Queen series, which I'm trying to do one a month. I knew Anne's story already, but Alison Ware took a really interesting angle. And it was interesting in the historical note. She talked about how there's been so many portrayals of Anne over time, and there probably always will be because she is just such a fascinating figure in history. She literally changed the course of history in so many ways. Um, this one, though, came at the angle of she wasn't in love with Henry. She wanted power. And I really kind of believe that angle, just knowing everything we do know about her. And, we see this with his later wives, like specifically Catherine Parr. She was in love with someone else, Thomas Seymour, who's a piece of shit if you know anything about him. And she was finally free to marry who she wanted, and she was going to marry the love of her life. And Henry VIII was like, I want to marry you. And she had no choice. If you see 60 Musical, that's what her whole song is about. So I get the idea, and you have to assume that the same thing happened to Anne Boleyn. Even though she was only the second wife, so he hadn't been like killing and divorcing wives yet, he was not going to let her go. Like, he wanted to marry her and he was going to do it. And she used the situation to the best of her advantage. What I really loved about this book is that we meet Anne as a child and we follow her years in Europe. She was at another court before she went to France, actually, which I didn't know. And the queen that she served there, and I'm really annoyed I can't think of it off the top of my head, but she was like pretty feminist and ahead of her time for this time period. And you see Anne learn a lot there about power and what a woman can do. And it really makes sense for everything that Anne went on to do with the rest of her life. So I knew Anne's story already. I watched the Tudors. I'm just so into the Tudor history that sometimes for me reading these books about these women, it's like I already know the story, so it's not so exciting. But I loved the angle of she wasn't in love with Henry. She was in love with the power and with being queen. And that's why she did everything that she did. And Alison Wears does in the historical note, like there's evidence to back that up. And I really enjoyed this. And it was also really cool reading it because on my UK trip, I went to Hampton Court. I've been to Hampton Court Palace twice. It is so magical and so special to go there. But I also went to Hever Castle, which is her childhood home. So I was able to picture very vividly all of the scenes of this book because I've been everywhere that it took place. So it was just really cool. And she talks about like the land at Hever. I was like, oh, I walked through that too. Like, it was just like a really special moment, and something I love about historical fiction. So I gave that 4 stars. The next book I read is The Underground Library by Jennifer Ryan. I loved this. So this is a World War II historical fiction that is really about a book about the power of books and libraries, which is just always so special to read. It is inspired by a real library. So basically, well, I'll tell you the main premise and then I'll get into the characters. The whole premise is that this library in London was bombed during the Blitz, and they moved the books underground because people were going into the tube stations to shelter from the bomb. So there was like a whole city network happening underground, and they brought the library there. It literally was the underground library. So that is what inspired this book. But we follow 3 very different women. So the first girl, I obviously don't know their names. I'm sorry. The first girl, she is a librarian at the library, and I don't actually know if they were engaged, but her guy has gone missing in action, presumed desertion in World War II. And basically what it is that they think he like ditched at Dunkirk, which is wild. If you know about Dunkirk, watch the movie Harris Allison if you don't. But so she like moves to London to become a librarian, and she starts really coming into her own and her own power and finding her voice. And she is the one behind all these amazing programs at the library and helping bring it underground and running it. And it's really special when you see what goes on with the library throughout the course of the book. These people their city is under siege, and they're finding connection and enjoyment in the power of books and community that a library can bring. Then there is this teenage girl who is volunteering at the library. She lives nearby. Her parents are pretty strict. Her dad is trying to like make their way up in the world. They're very like They have strong opinions on what she should and shouldn't do. And she finds out she's pregnant. And her whole life kind of blows up from that. And then the third character is a Jewish refugee. So she lived in Germany, and when all of the Nazi laws started being enacted, she actually was able to get a visa to come to England. So she does, and she meets women at the library and forms friendships. And yeah, I don't want to say too much to spoil, but I just really, really love this. All three characters, all their storylines were all so great. I was always excited to start a new chapter and be back with one of the characters. It was really, really great. If you're looking for something different for World War II historical fiction, or a book about books, this is the book for you. So I give that 4 stars. Next, I fucking finally finished Obama's book. So when it came out, when did it even come out? Like 4 years ago. I started listening to it on audio at my office and then just never finished. So over the last few weeks, I've been listening to it on audio, and I really, really love this. This is about his first, well, like, time in Senate and running for president, and then first term, I think, is when it ends. Or it ends when they killed Osama bin Laden, actually, which I actually think today, the day that I'm recording this, is the anniversary of when they killed Osama bin Laden. Which, do you want to know why I know that? Because the day that they shot Osama, I went to Bamboozle, which is like a pop punk music festival, but I went to see Bruno Mars. And when we were driving home, my friends, I was driving us home, my best friend's brother texted her, they killed Osama. And I remember this so vividly because it was the first time I ever logged onto Twitter to verify a piece of news. And on my Facebook memories today, it was a picture of Bruno Mars at Bamboozle. So that's why I'm thinking it's the anniversary. Anyway, this book on audio, I'm sure reading it was great too, but he narrates it and I could just listen to him talk forever. And I really loved how he explained the history of a situation before going into his thought process and how him and his team decided to handle things. So, specific examples, first, I loved reading about his campaign. Then, the 2008 financial crisis. I was 13 and 14 when that happened. So I really wasn't paying attention. My perspective was oh, a lot of people are moving to North Carolina because I grew up in New York where it's very expensive. And it was really interesting to hear him explain and break down what happened and then what he did. And then to get a bit more historic, there was this time, I can't remember specifically what they were talking about, but he went through the whole history between the US and Iran, and then went into the issues at hand. And just the way that he gave background information really helped you understand why he did what he did and made the decisions that he did. And I really enjoyed listening to him talk. I felt like I came away learning so much. I was very young during his whole presidency, and I was not paying attention to politics at the time. I did not start paying attention to politics until the 2016 election, when I think a lot of us started to finally pay attention to politics. And I get mad at myself sometimes that I was just so ignorant during the Obama years, because it was such a big moment, and it just like completely, it wasn't even a thought in my head. So it was cool to hear from him about his presidency and learn more about it. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and I'm pretty sure this is the last book that I've already covered. So, sorry that so many of them are like, oh, and I go listen to another episode, but go listen to the other episode where I also covered Rachel Price and Bye Baby. That's where I covered this one. I gave this 4 stars. This is a Kindle Unlimited romance, which I usually would not even pick up, but the cover was so good. So I was like, I have to do it. Our main guy is Ford, and he's a billionaire because obviously, and he finds out that he has a teenage daughter. At the same time, he moves to the town he vacationed in his whole life to start a recording studio. His best friend's younger sister moves back to town at the same time. Things happened. I love this so much. It had every single cliche, but it made me smile, and I really, really loved it. And it's the first in a series, so I can't wait to read more. Next, I read Good Half Gone by Taryn Fisher, and I did not like this book. So, Taryn Fisher writes these thriller suspense novels that have the most outlandish, unique plots. And sometimes it really, really works. Like, I loved her debut, The Wives. And I also loved An Honest, I don't know what it's called. The one about the Colts. I read it last year. This one just did not work for me. So our main girl is me saying was a spoiler, is she was born a twin, and they were identical twins, but her twin sister was kind of the more glamorous one, had the bigger personality. Everybody loved her. And the main girl, I'm just going to click and see their names because otherwise it's so confusing. Yeah, that's what I thought her name. Okay, so the main girl, her name is Iris, and her twin sister Piper was kind of the more glamorous one. Everybody loved her. And when they are 15, they go to the mall one day and they're hanging out with these boys from school. And Piper is dragged out and put into a car, and Iris never sees her again. And when she goes to the police, they like don't believe her because they're kind of like they're a poor family. Their mom is an addict. They never knew who their dad was. Their grandmother is raising them, and she's giving them evidence, and they are just refusing to believe it. And finally, after a few days, they open up an investigation, but obviously by then it's too late. So then you flash forward, it actually didn't say how old she was in the second timeline, but assuming like 10 to 15 years. And still no word from Piper. She's basically worked the rest of her life, like through school and then in her career, to infiltrate this mental hospital on this remote island off the coast of Seattle where she lives. So she finally gets a job there, and you learn that it's because she knows who killed her sister and he's in there, and she is trying to get access to him to presumably try to kill him. So this is my issue with Taryn Fisher, and it happened in the one that I mentioned that I like about the Colts. I loved the Colts timeline. Her timelines don't match up well. Like, they almost feel like they were written by two different people. They're two different books. I loved the past timeline in this book. I don't know if love, maybe that might be a stretch, but I really enjoyed it. I was interested in Iris trying to figure out what happened to her sister, the frustration of the authorities not taking her seriously. All of the stuff in the mental hospital just seemed crazy. Like, none of it made sense. And then by the end, it was like none of it even paid off. I don't know. I wish I DNF'd it, honestly. Like, maybe 2 stars is even being generous. I really didn't like it. That's all I have to say. Next, I read Royal Scandal by Amy Carter. This is a sequel to the book Royal Blood that I read over the summer, and it's this YA series that's basically the British version of American Royals, if you're familiar with that series, which I love that series. So in this fictional world, Edward VIII never abdicated. If you're not aware who he was Queen Elizabeth's uncle, and he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorced American, and that was not allowed. And also, speaking of women who didn't want to be queen, Wallis Simpson like didn't want to marry Edward VIII. He was just so obsessed with her that he was like, obviously we have to get married, and he caused like this whole drama and changed the course of history because of it. And that is just so Anne Boleyn, right? Anyway, so then he was king. He never had a coronation though, and then he abdicated. And then Queen Elizabeth's dad, who was his brother, became king, and then Queen Elizabeth, and then obviously Charles. And actually though, I've seen this theory, and it does make sense in a way, like how we still would have gotten Elizabeth on the throne, because Edward and Wallis never had kids. So assuming that stayed true, even if they were able to get married and still be king and queen, then Elizabeth would have been his heir anyway. So we probably still would have had King Charles right now. Just makes you think, you know? Anyway, in this fictional world, that never happened. So the current king in this world is a descendant of that line. I don't even know. Actually, I don't even know if that's true. But I know that he didn't abdicate in this world. So, like, Queen Elizabeth was still born, but she was like a royal cousin, not the royal, if that makes sense. So the main girl in that one, though, her name is Evangeline. And in the first book, you find out that she is the illegitimate daughter of the King of England, which sign me up. I'm obsessed. And the whole first book is about her moving to England, and a lot of stuff starts happening. The cover makes it look like she's a vampire. This is not a vampire book. I really can't say what this book is about though, because it picks up right where the first one left off. I liked the first book more. I gave this one, the second one, 3 stars. It just didn't, it got a little weird for me, but I'm really into the concept of this series, and I'm obviously going to continue reading it. I think it is fun, and I would recommend it. They're YA, so they're quick and easy to read. And yeah, I can't say too much because it's the second in a series, but I give that 3 stars. The next book I read is Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. I gave this 3 stars. I'm a big fan of Megan Miranda's books. I feel like they do kind of all sit around 3 and 4 stars for me, but I don't know, there's just something about them that I'm always interested in. So in this book, our main girl, I don't know her name. If I make merch, it's going to say our main girl, I don't know her name. Her dad has just died. So she lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. And since he has just died, she goes home to the small town off the coast where she grew up for the services. And her dad was the like chief of police. Everyone in town knew him, super connected. Everyone loved him. And she has 2 brothers. One is older, and then one is like directly younger than her. Like they're very close in age. And when they're home for the services, they live like on this river, and a car was found in the river. So it was like this on their property. So it was like this whole big to do, whatever. And as she leaves town, and then she has to come back for some things I don't want to spoil, and they find another car. And that car belonged to her mom, who she thought left the family when she was a kid. And now her car is in the backyard in the water, and it just opens everything up. And she starts looking into who her family really are, what really happened to her mom. Did her mom actually abandon her? I thought this was so good. I did only give it 3 stars, but honestly, the more that I think about it, I feel like I probably should have given it 4 stars. It was so unique. There was just really interesting twists and turns, and I can't say too much because it's a thriller, but it really just, it was so unique, and that just really made it stand out to me. It's hard with thrillers specifically to do the same tropes, and I loved the dynamic between her and her brothers, and like, yeah, I loved it. I guess let's say 4 stars, even though I gave it 3. Next, I read Right on Cue by Fallon Ballard, which was our April book club pick for the month. So I'm not going to get into it. I will just say I gave it 4 stars. If you want to hear my thoughts, there is a full episode where I talked about them, the April book club episode, and Fallon joined me on the episode. I had so much fun talking to her. I could have talked to her for hours. So go check that out. Next, I read Legacy, which is the 6th book in the private series. I gave it 4 stars. Not much else to say on that one. Then I read The Husbands by Holly Grabazio, and this was the weirdest book I have ever read. I don't even know how I would begin to explain it. So the main girl is out one night for her friend's hen do, because it's English, bachelorette for us Americans. But it was not like bachelorettes like we have now, where you have to spend $1,000 and go away for a weekend. It was just a fun night out, like how it used to be back in the maybe more financially smarter days of weddings and bachelorette trips. Anyway, so she comes home, and she's single and she lives alone, but she gets home and there's a man in her apartment, and she's like freaking out, obviously. And he's like, "Hey, babe, like, how was the night out?" And she's like, "What?" And then she looks around her apartment, and things are different. And there's wedding photos on the mantle, and even her phone lock screen is different. And this man is saying he's her husband. But then he goes up into the attic to check something, and a different man comes down. So basically, what happens is the attic is like magically sending husbands to her. And she can, anytime they go up into the attic, though, it like switches them. So sometimes a guy will come down that she doesn't like, and she'll send him right back up. Or sometimes she'll like someone. So there's one case where she spends a few months with this guy and she really likes him, but then he goes up there without her knowing and he disappears. And that's like all I can say about this. It it's for so long in the book, I was like, what is the plot? Like, even when they kind of introduced the plot, I was like, that's what this is about. Like, it was weird. It was such a unique concept. I think because it was so weird is that's why I kept reading and I read it so quickly, but I don't think I liked it, which is why I gave it 3 stars. I feel like I still can't figure out. I don't think I enjoyed it, but I also couldn't stop reading it. So I don't know what that means, but that's what happened with this one. Next, I read The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson. I think, like a lot of other people, I picked this up after reading Bride, which is Ali Hazelwood's paranormal romance about a vampire and a werewolf. I've said this publicly many a time. I've never been into werewolves. I am a vampire girly. But Ali Hazelwood did something to me, and she made me attracted to a werewolf. And I never thought we would get here. Like, I couldn't even watch Teen Wolf. And this one just further did it for me. This one is interesting because they're both werewolves. So the main girl, her grandma is just really pestering her about getting married and settling down, which actually was a plot point that I didn't really like. And like I get it. One of the last conversations I had with my grandma before she died was that she wanted me to get married and have kids. And I was like, I'm not the one. You should be talking to my brother who is doing that before me. But so she decides that she needs a fake boyfriend to get her grandma off her back. So she approaches, and she's a nurse, and or is she a nurse? She's an ER doctor in a hospital. And so she approaches the like notoriously grumpy cardiologist in the hospital. Is a cardiologist also a surgeon? I should know that from all the years of Grey's Anatomy I watched. I'm sorry, Christina Yang, but he's also a surgeon. He does cardiology surgery. I'm just going to stop talking about that now. And she's like, hey, will you be my fake boyfriend for this? And he's like, hey, actually, I've been hiding the fact that I'm an alpha to the hospital and I'm about to be outed. So I need a mate because that will make, I guess, it better. And so she agrees to be his fake mate, and he'll be like the fake boyfriend for the grandma. And obviously things start happening, and she's an omega, and I really learned a lot. I learned a lot in this about alphas and omegas and things that happen in biology. And I really enjoyed it. Fake dating is my favorite trope. I like this paranormal twist on it, and I don't know, something as I approach 30 years old, I'm you know how like your cells switch over every few years? I guess in this switchover, I'm becoming a werewolf girl. Next, I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and this is our May Book Club pick, so I'm not going to get into it, but I will just tell you I gave this 5 stars. It's my second 5-star read of the year, so get excited for that episode on May 30th. The next book that I read, oh my God, I think this is also by a man because it's CJ Carey. And men are doing that annoying thing now where they'll go by initials to be ambiguous, which is what women had to do for all of time. Anyway, by CJ Carey, I read Widowland. I picked this up at Barnes & Noble because the historical fiction table at my hometown Barnes & Noble always has buy one, get one 50. So I'm just like always like just grabbing books from there. And this one intrigued me. The cover is really good. And the premise at first scared me, but I was like, let me check it out. And oh, it was scary how I read it. So in this world, this is a dystopian historical fiction. And in this world, Churchill never became prime minister. The US never entered World War II. So the Germans very quickly got air control over England. And it was really interesting after watching my favorite show, Masters of the Air, because they literally, the whole point of the fighter pilots, specifically what the Americans were doing, that was absolutely insane and so dangerous, and basically all of them died, was because they wouldn't launch D-Day without having air control over Europe. And so it's just interesting then to see, like, in this dystopian world and what I'm about to tell you what happened, it was because we lost air control because the Americans never came over to help, and we never had Churchill. Could you honestly, like, thank God for like all of, like, as I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, like I'm always so grateful, especially reading as much historical fiction as I do. And then after watching Master of the Air, I was like, oh my God, thank God for these men. But I was just reading this, I was like, wow, thank God for those brave men and women of that generation who fought and sacrificed their lives that saved us from what happens in this book. So in this fictional world, then they're about to lose. So England and Germany enter this alliance, and it's called the Protectorate. So Germany then takes over all of Europe. Like all of Europe is split into Germany and Russia. There's a map, and it was crazy to look at. And like it's not called France anymore. It's called Germany. Like it was just so crazy and scary to look at because that's what they were trying to do. And England, though, like on this map, it's a different color and it's a protectorate. And they're in this, it's called the Alliance, but they're basically under German control. They never name Hitler. They call him the leader, but it's very obvious that it's him. And they name drop everybody else, like Goebbels, Goring, Himmler, all of those monsters that we fucking hate. And so when they entered this alliance, right away, Oswald Mosley becomes prime minister of the United Kingdom. If you don't know who he is, he made an appearance in one of my favorite shows, Peaky Blinders. He was the leader of the BUF, the British Union of Fascists, and he married Diana Mosley, who this is one of my, or no, Diana Mitford, who this is one of my favorite historical rabbit holes. I'll go very quickly. There were 6 Mitford sisters. Diana had originally married a Guinness, like of the Guinness beers. She divorced him, which was absolutely insane for the time, to be with Oswald Mosley, who was a fascist and an evil man. Then there's Unity, who was Hitler's lover and literally shot herself in the face after he declared war on England, and she survived. Then there was Jessica, who was a communist and moved to America. Then there was Nancy, who was on the right side of history and ended up spying on her sisters for Churchill and his government. And then there was Deborah, who married into the Cavendish family, which is like the dukedom. She became the Duchess of Devonshire, and Chatsworth House, which is Pemberley in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and I went there on my trip, that became her house. Anyway, Mosley is prime minister. What was the other really crazy thing? So many crazy things, but also the craziest and the scariest is that women were put into a caste system, and they had these names. Like the women at the top were known as Gellies for the guy who became like the leader of England, his niece that he really loved because she was seen as like the ideal form of womanhood. And then the lowest ones are Fridas, and those are all women because they were seen those were all widows because they were seen as like the lowest in society because they had nothing else to contribute. They didn't have husbands and they could no longer have children. And the way the caste system works was just really horrifying to read. Basically, the whole premise of the book, our main character is a Gelly. She has a job in the government in the Ministry of Culture, and she's tasked with rewriting. They're literally rewriting history books in this, and she's tasked with rewriting literature. So she's given like Jane Eyre, and she has to rewrite it, and she has to rewrite Pride and Prejudice to take out any characteristics of the women that make them go against like the way that it is now. So like Lizzie Bennet can't like be her basically. Like she's a change the whole book. It's so crazy. But she remembers a time before the alliance, and she starts like kind of having her mind opened up again because she's reading all of this literature, and she starts kind of questioning things, and a lot kicks off, and it was just really horrifying to read. I gave that 3 stars. Next, I read Mad Women by Louisa Traeger. This was another one of my 24 and 24 books. This is a biographical fiction about Nellie Bly. She comes up a lot in historical fiction, so I was excited to learn fully about her. If you're not familiar, she is a very famous reporter and journalist who went undercover at the Blackwell Asylum, which was just like absolutely horrifying. You can go Google that if you want to. And she went there for a story, and she came out and completely exposed it and actually got the government to start making some positive change for the mentally ill. And they were locking up people who were completely fine. So even for normal people, the risk of getting locked up there was taken away. Half of the book, though, is her childhood and how she got started with writing. I liked that, but it was a bit slow. It was when she moves to New York and takes this assignment, and then you're with her in the horrifying 10 days. She was only in there for 10 days, and it was still so scary. And then I loved learning about the aftermath and all the positive work that she got done because of that. I gave it 3 stars. The final book, I feel like I'm rushing, and it's because I have to leave for a dinner reservation, and I do this every single time I record these wrap-up videos. I always go longer than I expect to. Anyway, final book is This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune, and I gave this 2 stars. I didn't like it, and I know a lot of people were disappointed when I said that. I loved Every Summer After, which was her debut. I gave it 5 stars. It's on my favorite shelf. And then last year I read Meet Me at the Lake, and I was like, absolutely not. And in the writer's note for that one, she talked about how much she struggled writing it, and that made me really sad because it was obvious. So then I was a little bit nervous to pick this one up, and it just didn't do it for me. It was a cute story, I guess. This is a brother's best friend romance, and there's like flashbacks interspersed, but I never was fully sold on them as a couple. And that was the same issue I had with her last book. And I feel like on paper, if you were to just pick this one up, like read it in a day at the beach, it's probably good, but the romance genre has just gotten so good. Like the bar has been raised so high that it makes it harder to make a lasting impression on me, which I guess is a good problem to have. But the last romance I read before this was Funny Story, which I gave 5 stars. And for this to follow that, like there's no way that this specific book was ever going to reach that, which it doesn't need to for me to enjoy it. I just didn't enjoy it. Like I honestly was bored for most of the book. So it didn't do it for me. It might still do it for you though, as I always say. And yeah, I don't want to just like bash it because I kind of feel bad for some reason with this author that I don't like them because I loved Every Summer After. That is the April wrap up. I'm now going to go to dinner, but thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, as you whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kara. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Please leave a rating and review. It'll make me so happy. Our May book club pick is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I loved it. We'll have a giant talk about the romance genre on that episode, which comes out on May 30th. Get your thoughts to me on May 28th. Have a lovely week. I will see you next week.